I think sometimes moms discredit how much knowledge they actually have on what their child needs to thrive.
For a lot of people, I see it's not always these big major accommodations. A lot of times it's the right little things in place that can go so far. And those things so often that these parents are doing.
Hey mama, are you feeling like you're walking on eggshells around your little one? Does every day feel like a battleground from breakfast to bedtime? You're not alone. If meltdowns, sensory sensitivities, and communication challenges are turning your days upside down, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Sensory Savvy Mama, the podcast for moms raising neurodivergent little ones. I'm your host, Victoria, and I get it. I've been there. The endless research, the frustrating appointments, the feeling like no one understands what you and your child are going through. Here, we ditch the cookie cutter advice and embrace the power of understanding your child's unique sensory needs within the context of your family. We'll dive into practical strategies, expert insights, and real-life stories to help you create a calmer, more connected family life. Because you deserve to feel empowered, not exhausted. Let's ditch the overwhelm and discover the joy of raising a sensory kid in a neurodiverse family. You ready? Let's go.
Welcome back to the Sensory Savvy Mama podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Today is a guest episode with Sam Marion. He is a social worker and also neurodivergent adult, family man, and has built this really incredible practice in the state of Georgia. So for anyone who's listening in Georgia, you should definitely look up Sam if you're in need of some additional support. I'm so excited for this episode to talk about all things growing up neurodivergent, schools, the ways that we sometimes don't even realize how we're accommodating our own sensory needs and how we can shed more light on that and bring more intention to that, and then do that for our kids and teach them how to do that. So it shortens that gap, that learning gap that sometimes we run into as adults of figuring things out and trying things so many times before we get there. I so hope you enjoy this episode, and let's get into it.
Sam Marion, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I identify as mostly neurodivergent. That's autistic, ADHD, I have a reading disability, I have all the executive function challenges. I did like gifted as a kid. There's probably more that I'm always convinced I'm forgetting some. It's what in that
Sure,
list of like
sure.
neurodivergences. So this is what I live out every day, my own experience, and this is the crowd that I work with. You know, on a day when my computer broke, I was like, oh gosh, if I could just wait a couple hours before I buy a new one, I could probably like get good recommendations from some of my clients. I will say, I bought a new computer today. I have been affirmed in my choice by clients who are like, oh yeah,
Oh,
that was a
good.
good idea. You bought the right thing for you. You were not working with enough before. So yeah, into that is who I am. This is what I do. I work a lot with families. People reach out to me because their kid needs a therapist, they think, and then I end up supporting the family. I do a lot more work
Yeah,
with parents than they're
yeah,
expecting, but then they embrace it. Like I said to a mom this morning, your kid has met a lot of professionals in his young life. Let's not race to add another one.
yeah,
Let's understand everything going on. Let me help y'all understand everything going on. As much as we can, let's see what we can do supporting the family from the top down before we
sure.
bring a kid in. Parents always embrace that.
Yeah,
They're almost always good with that. And neuroaffirming care is all about supporting people for who they are, embracing somebody where they are, where they're coming in, embracing the differences, not pathologizing,
yeah,
acknowledging struggles and difficulties. There's so many challenges. If you're sitting here lost socially and confused about what's going on around you, that is challenging. But we don't have to just dive to pathologizing and try to fix somebody. This is who we are,
right.
and that's okay.
100%. My background is traditional OT, loved it, but I felt like as I got out into clinical practice, I was like, some of this doesn't feel right. But I couldn't articulate what was going on exactly. Now I identify as neurodivergent, but I didn't realize that at the time because what my definition was in school was not the things I was struggling with. I had been identified as gifted as a child too, but I was terrible at test taking. So people were like, you're smart, but not really. But something's off here. And of course, hindsight gives us so much more information. We can look back and connect the dots a lot more. That was one of the things that shifted for me. I was really struggling with the traditional model, which was more child-centric in an outpatient setting, I was seeing so many families in burnout. And I wasn't really able to do much with them based on the clinical model at the clinic I was working at. And I got really frustrated with that. We can have a great session once a week, but there's not enough carryover support for the families with this. And then when the pandemic happened, I shifted into more of a coaching model without even thinking much of it. I found a way to continue working with some of my high support needs families, and it worked out so beautifully. And so then the formation of the Edison Collective in this podcast was to continue that. How do I help families first? Because I found if I use a sensory lens, because there's so much misinformation about sensory processing, even within occupational therapy, I've seen some of my colleagues are great at what they do, but just jump to let's integrate. If we don't know fully how they're processing, what's an environment that they thrive in and what supports and accommodations they need before we say they have to learn this skill and do all these things. What if we just met them right where they're at? What would that look like? How would that be supportive in a family? Not by giving parents a much bigger, longer to-do list, but sometimes it's simple, small shifts can make such a big difference. It's really cool to meet other professionals who are supporting families uniquely in their own way.
I get asked, maybe less now than before, but I've been asked several times, what's a social worker doing in this space? In my master's program, in my assessment psychopathology class, which was a semester long, and I had class about 2.5 hours a day, probably like half of a class, we covered ADHD, autism, and learning disabilities. And this was actually under the DSM-4, right? This is pre-DSM-5. I had the class as DSM-5 was rolling out. I don't know why they taught us in the book that was going away, but they did. And so this was not part of my education. And that's true for a lot of professionals. And so in some ways, there's an advantage in that because I wasn't taught much about, from a non-affirming approach. It was more like, oh, that's just not what we do. So you refer that out and just be aware and then refer out. I didn't have a ton of formal education to set me up in a certain perspective. I got into this after the last several years, and I learned, understood. What I do have is the social work background that's foundational theory, and social work is systems theory. I see individuals always part of systems and various systems, part of a family system. If they go to school, they're part of that education system and all these different layers, systems, and you're never just an individual. My bent is already towards, looking at an individual as part of a system. In my early career in private practice, I was doing a lot of play therapy. I do some consultation with a play therapist who truly has about 50, now like over 50 years experience of play therapy, which is a shocking.
Yeah.
She pushed me a lot when I was new to it to engage the parents, saying, look, you can only do so much and you'll only learn so much from the kids. You've got to call those parents in. You got to work with the parents. I was really anxious about that, but now that is so much what I do. At the time I was in a small town of South Georgia and calling the parents in, these are also people I was probably going to see socially around town. If I didn't work with this person, I was saying, you got to drive 30 to 50 miles away. There's nobody else close by. Now it's different and how much my work is virtual. I'm in the suburbs of Atlanta, so I can sort of embrace it in a different way. Sometimes parents are like, oh, I can work with you virtually instead of driving my kid an hour to your office. I'll start there. There's a little bit of that sometimes helps embracing the whole system and understanding, what about their siblings? What about, the different tiers and layers? And that's, and like you said, someone's in your office for an hour, but there's so much more support that's needed. I say that exact same thing to parents. Like, look, you can bring your kid in my office for an hour a week. You can come 3 times a week. It's still just 3 hours and they're with you the rest of the time. So let's talk about what's going on within that system to how to set up supports.
Yeah.
Because what's 3 hours compared to the rest of the week? It's not much.
No, it's really not. It's really not. And sometimes working from a sensory lens, that bottom up when we look at nervous system regulation, sometimes parents are like, I feel like I'm going to have to complete these elaborate obstacle courses and sensory diets, and we're going to have a really specific schedule. And a lot of times it's really not. It's because we're looking at the whole context. When they understand oh, my child has a very dynamic sensory system, and these are some of the triggers, but these are some of the things that they crave, and this is how they best regulate. It's that light bulb moment, and all of a sudden they become so much more effective at co-regulating, which automatically brings down the energetics of the household, and they start to see change pretty quickly, which is really cool because parents are so smart and intuitive. But there was a period of time where we were more like, the professionals know best, and let me tell you what to do. Parents don't have the sensory background because that's not something we are very literate in across the board as far as parenting. So if I can give them those pieces, I find that most parents are completely capable and quite the expert in knowing how to implement it without me even providing specifics. Once they have those little pieces of, hey, this is what's happening within the context of this system, then they are like, oh, I know what I could do. I could do this and this. And it just opens things up so much differently for them and for their child. And that happens the whole week long, not just in a 1 hour session.
Yeah, I think in the next 5 to 10 years, I firmly believe we're going to start to acknowledge in the mental health field that sensory challenges are much more common. We're starting there, but they're much more common than we're even recognizing now. And there's so much of a source of dysregulation. When everybody went home to the pandemic and suddenly people worked from their living room with a lamp on instead of the fluorescent overheads, and they got more done, and they're going, wait, what is this? I don't have headaches now. I think people started to acknowledge a little bit, and that's picking up pace of the neurodiversity movement. I think it's come out of the pandemic. But I really do think that it's so much, we're going to recognize that it's so much more pervasive, so much more common source of dysregulation. But the other thing, I think that when we look at the sensory stuff, what we get from that is, especially for parents, real action steps you can take.
Yeah.
And in all the stuff as parents, there's so much we can't control, but I can turn a light off. I can turn the volume down or turn the volume up.
Yeah.
There's some really simple sensory strategies that sometimes go a really long way. Sometimes having your kids wake up in the morning and you got a little bit of calm music playing that they're like kind of coming into the kitchen to hear. For some people, that would be the worst thing possible. And some kids, this helps start the morning off nice and calm.
Yep.
Easy experiment. Hey, Alexa, play some calming music.
Yeah.
That's the whole experiment. Right?
Yeah.
And so I think, that's coaching parents towards some of that, especially the parents that I see. Because again, I'm an hour outside of downtown Atlanta, and I have people reach out to me that are willing to drive. They're desperate. And to have anything that they can try, they're willing to, and then to get any success at all, it's so impactful.
Yeah, especially when they can be the modality of success. They're the agent of change. It's not because we've given them some formula that they have to follow. It's really cool. And I think it's so interesting. I work with a lot of late diagnosed moms who are usually finding this out as their kids are going through this, like, hey, wait a minute, like these are all the things that I struggled with as a kid, right? And so I'm thankful for more of that curiosity, more people talking about it, because like you said, I think we're seeing a lot of momentum building, which is really great. So it's interesting because a lot of times I have moms coming and they're like, my kid is a seeker, but I'm an avoider and I don't know what to do. Like, I need calm and quiet and they need movement and loudness. And so it's fun when they start seeing all, especially within the context of a family, when you have multiple children and people, how do we make this work and blend this together in a way that everyone has their needs met and aren't competing against each other? It's really fun to process through some of that and play around with some of the ideas.
Like there's 4 of us that live in my home, and 2 of us can be singing Pink Pony Club at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning while mixing up pancake batter, and 2 people that are like, what is wrong with you? Turn that off. There should be no noise right now. And it's, yeah, so I get that balance, and I think some of this, to acknowledge, this isn't pathologizing.
No.
This is the human experience of,
right.
And there's times, and we, as humans, we're so dynamic that there's times that I'm such a sensory seeker. And then other times I'm like, no, I'm just going to sit in the corner. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want any extra input. I'm good. We are dynamic.
Yes, exactly. A lot of times people think, oh, my kid is a sensory seeker, period, end of story. Well, actually, if you think about music panels where you have all the different controls and you're constantly adjusting as you go through the song, we all have a little bit of that happening all the time. Sometimes we're seeking, sometimes we're more avoidant, sometimes we're not registering as well as we normally do. Like, it's always constantly moved. Just like throughout a song, you don't have the same thing set across the board for the entirety of the song. It changes as you go through the bridge and the chorus. And that's very much how life is. And if you think about your energy levels throughout the course of the day, when you first wake up to the middle of the day, to that 3 o'clock slump that always creeps up on me, to the end of the day, our energy fluctuates in what we need to help support us, especially in different environments that we move across too. And I think that was something you touched on too, is when we started creating environments without even knowing, oh, I work really well when I have background music on, natural lighting and no artificial lighting. And the ways that we do these things for ourselves without even realizing it. And when we start to shed light on that, we can start to figure out what our kids need, because they don't always have that sense of agency or autonomy to start to change their environment in the same way that we can. So it's fun seeing those processes come out.
Real quick pause here. If you're listening and thinking, this makes sense, but I still don't know where to start, or you get the overall idea of the sensory system, but you don't know how to decode it for your specific child, I want you to check out the Clarity Lab. It's a do-it-yourself, easy guide to decode the 8 different sensory systems, how we're processing that music soundboard that we were just talking about. But what it does is it helps guide you through to the clarity for looking at your child through that sensory lens. You can do it in an afternoon, or you can spread it out over a couple of days. The link is in the show notes. And when this podcast drops in September 2025, the Clarity Lab is only $9. So definitely grab that. Now, back to the episode.
I really like the mixing board image you gave. I think that's really, really helpful. I'm going to steal that. I'll be honest with you.
You can. Gladly. I am happy to share that one. It's the best thing I found. I'm not huge into music, so I'm sure somebody with a music background is going to be like, you're not talking about it the right way. But you're constantly shifting and adjusting based on the dynamics. I think when we hold that loosely in mind versus just labels can be really helpful in understanding ourselves, but I think also sometimes labels can be like, well, I'm this, so I can never do that. And that is one thing in the neuroaffirming movement. It doesn't mean anything is fixed or written in concrete. Our brains are so dynamic, always changing. Being open to that and open that your needs might change over the course of your lifespan, just like they change over the course of a day. And getting to see how life moves us through these circumstances and the things that shape shift us a little bit through those are really cool.
Yeah, there's times that I'm absolutely an avoider. I don't usually work long work days. One day every other week I do. And that's today. Today will be the longest work day I will have had maybe all summer long as we record this in July. By the time I'm done with today, I don't want to talk to anybody. I'm done, right? I'm done. And it's okay. And that's a lot of people are that way. And this is where I think about adults, because I work with people. If we just talk about my autistic clients, they range in age from 6 years old up into their 60s. It's a wide age range of folks that I support. This is where people think, I got a new job closer to home, or I work from home, but they lose that commute time. They could just like sit in silence. People that realize they need more of a commute than to walk up the steps from the basement, but they don't have the language for it. And some of it is sensory. Like they've been engaged and then they walk up the basement steps and they're greeted, that's an 8-second walk, whatever, 3 seconds. And they're greeted by the dog and 2 kids, and it's too much. It's also just not a kid thing. This is humans of all ages. Think about those things. I'll point that out, like the commute. Go for a walk, create a false commute for yourself. Have 5 minutes of silence, things like that. Just little strategies that can go a long way.
Yeah. I think as we get curious about those things and slow down enough to pay attention, we start to see these little patterns that we've put in without even realizing it. And I think even knowing. Like for me, I love the strong, bittersweet taste of coffee first thing in the morning. I need to have that by myself first thing. Let me just have that first cup of coffee. And then I can shift and go into all the things that need to get done. That has become a ritual for me. This is my start in the morning. This sets the rest of the day up. For a while, for some health reasons, I was trying to get off of coffee. Yeah, it was not a good thing. But it's interesting, like having a cup of coffee in the morning, or if you're in a long meeting that's going really long, needing to start moving around or tapping your leg. And yet, when a child in a classroom who's bored and not stimulated enough by the material and they start moving around, it's like, oh no, you need to settle down. You need to listen to the teacher. If we were in the same situation, we might excuse ourselves to go to the bathroom and walk down the hall for a second, or we would figure out a way to stay awake in something that was long and not necessarily the most comfortable.
I have fidgets all around. So I'm sitting while I do my telehealth work right now. The whole time I've had this little spiky, I don't know what you call this. I saw this in a Facebook group of therapists.
Love it.
Somebody was like, hey, I've got a client who's started to use this instead of self-harm. What do you think? This is a Facebook group of neurodiversity-affirming therapists within my state. And several commenters were like, I don't know, but I just ordered one. I'll try. And people are commenting a few days later, like, I really like mine a lot. And this is great. You know, and it's very much a sensory seeker kind of thing. And I'm squeezing it in my hand. It's spiky all the way around. I have a whole basket of fidgets.
Oh, nice.
These are mine. You know, this is not a tiny little basket, right? That's
no, I love it.
Where I sit and I do in-person sessions, I have fidgets closer to where clients sit and some by me. I am a mover. I don't really sit still. People are like, how are you a therapist that doesn't sit still? I have an ottoman that I move my feet around. I kick it around all the time. I have fidgets. I will throw a ball around with a kid in my office. You know, all kinds of things. There's a high likelihood outside of 15, 20 minutes of recess, maybe, I move more during a given day than most elementary kids are able to do, other than getting up to go to the recess, their PE once a week. If they have that, I have so much available to me. I can have a whole big basket of fidgets, not to mention the other ones on my desk that are not in the basket. Kids don't get that. We don't think, how many strategies do we get access to as adults that kids don't?
Yeah.
Even writing things down however we want. Kids in school may have, for executive function supports, kids may have like an agenda they take to and from school every day that's the teacher might write a behavior note in there, or just a check mark of, yeah, they're all good. And they're told, oh, you could note things in there. Some teachers do a better job than others of, hey, let's look ahead for the week. But if that's not the best way for that kiddo to keep up with it, they're not giving other strategies. Whereas I've got my notes on my phone. I bet you've got something similar. I've got sticky notes on my desk that I will come in for the day. We have so much we do as adults. We need the most supports.
Right. Exactly. It's so funny that you use that as an example, because when I was in elementary school, upper elementary school, I started failing classes and my parents were like, what is going on? Well, I was forgetting to take assignments home to do. They had a meeting with my teacher and they decided to give me an agenda or a planner, but I never remembered to write anything down in it. So it didn't really help anything. And there weren't any cues built into the day to remind me to do that. It took a lot of playing around with that as I got older to figure out. And now, like, across all my devices, everything syncs. And I have a date once a week where I sit down and I make sure everything is there. I have a written one too that I still keep, which I love because physically writing it down helps my brain remember it so much better than having it on my device. But also I need that device because I don't always have my notebook with me. Like you said, there's tons of strategies that we just try and unknowingly implement in our lives, and yet we're expecting kids to perform at this level without giving them the resources and the tools and the experience with different modalities and things. I think we need to flip it, like, okay, you're here, let's meet you where you're at and then grow with you. Let's try these different things.
I have a poster calendar. I get a school year calendar, so it's July through June. I can map out for my kids' school, sort of their whole school calendar on there is one color. Any big work, if I'm going to speak at a conference, things like that, I'll put that in a different color.
Yeah.
Whatever else we have going on. And then when I look at it, I can see the entire school year. I can tell you right now that March of 2026 will be busy. But it color coded where it's like, well, it actually isn't, it's not as busy as it looks. It's just a lot of things, but they're all sort of manageable. I'm such a visual person too.
Same.
I can spread it out. I was at swim lessons the other day, my kids in the pool, and I've got this poster thing in front of me looking at the calendar for the year. But I don't really care. I'm unfolding it because this is what works for me.
Yeah.
And this is where I've done this for a couple of years now. And it goes back to it. Kids don't get the chance to personalize things unless somebody creates that space.
Sure.
Right. You know, how many kids have no clue that their parents write everything down? Their parents just always miss it. A mom can hold up a notebook sitting next to the kid, like, yeah, you know, mom's like 3-ring binder. And the kid's like, I never knew what was in that. It's just always there. Hey, mom, if you model, make sure your child knows what you're doing. You've got parents raising kids. You've probably figured out some supports that work for you. And it makes your kids know what you're doing and why, because then it's inclusive. You have this need too, mom, dad, you have that need too. Maybe I will try this out.
I think that's great. Sometimes it's funny because I'm working with moms who are late diagnosed, like the apple doesn't fall far from the tree sometimes. So sometimes the things we need, our kids need too. And we've not thought that far ahead because we learned it so much later in life that we didn't think that we needed it early on because it wasn't offered to us early on. But
and how much further ahead in life can these kids be if they start doing it 12, what their mom started doing at 35? There's so many examples of this. I work with who's very emotionally aware, and this kid's parents are just like, this kid is going to miss out on so much heartache in comparison because of this child's awareness to some stuff. The parent's story is why they've helped this child be aware of some of this stuff. But you can see, you know, some of the just little skills, jotting notes down, whatever it may be, and how far that will go to get ahead in life.
I think that is the tip of the iceberg of this generational conditioning and reconditioning that we're seeing right now, which is really cool. We are at this place because of what our parents and grandparents did. Now we're in this place where we can hold space for our kids to have much more big emotions and be more emotionally intelligent. I think it's really cool to see some of that happening.
I think it's really important that it's happening.
So what would you say to a mom who's kind of new to this, starting to explore and maybe research neurodivergence? Maybe she has a specific diagnosis in mind, trying to process through all the things, because when you start going down those rabbit holes on the internet, there is some interesting stuff out there. And it's wonderful, but it's also can be completely overwhelming to try to know who to believe or who to trust. Based on your experience and your practice, what would you say to a mom who's in that place?
I would start saying, if you've made it to the point where you're listening to a podcast on the topic, you're probably doing a lot of really good things already. And as you're realizing how many things are out there, give yourself some grace to go at the pace that works for you. You're showing up for your kid, supporting your kid or yourself, and you're actually trying to learn more and do more. I feel pretty confident that in the big picture, that goes a long way. To be able to remain as present as you can by not overloading yourself, I think goes a long way.
Yeah.
And so that's okay. You don't have to do all the things. And if something doesn't feel aligned for you, you don't have to stick with it. Or you can try something, you can read something. At the end of the day, for the mamas, they're the expert on their child. They know their child. They've been raising this kid. The diagnosis gave us a little bit of clarity and connected some dots, but it didn't create a new person. That child is the same person that they've known since the day, for the moms, since before that baby was born. For those who have adopted, since the day they first held that baby, right?
Yeah.
First day they saw that baby. And so, yes, the mamas, like the parents, they are the experts, their own child. I think more than anything else that kids benefit, you talk about co-regulation, kids benefit from a present, authentic parent who can help co-regulate. Maybe it's not by any particular modality at this point in time, but it is sort of showing up authentically and go at the pace that works best. A whole bunch of therapies, and then the kids are never with the parents, are exhausted from going all around. Well, that's not going to help. And anybody who makes a promise that they can fix this, or, you know, in 3 sessions, I can change that, I'm always a little wary of that. This, wait a second here. This is, you know, I don't think that's a thing. Everybody is their own. We're just talking about humans are dynamic. Everybody's going to be at their own pace, and that's okay.
I think the one area that I get a little bit scared of is when we have big safety concerns like elopements or those kinds of things. We do need to put some things in place to make your child safe and to help you manage and understand that better. The whole fixing that can be a very toxic undercurrent that we don't even realize is going on sometimes. Instead of always looking ahead at what could be different, what still needs to change, what's not quite to the level that you want it to be at yet, looking how far you've come in this journey too. A lot of moms, like you said, have already intuitively been doing stuff that they don't even give themselves credit for. All of the learning they have been doing, all of the ways that they've been maybe quietly, silently, not even acknowledging the ways that they've made accommodations and supports in place for their child, but aren't giving themselves credit for those things. And how I get this one a lot, especially when they're like, we never had any issues. And when they start school, they're getting called every day. That's often because that mom has already been creating an atmosphere where her child can thrive. And now they're in a school system that doesn't allow for the flexibility or the sensory supports or the accommodations that that child needs. And that child is expected to conform or fit into that system the way that they want, right? Without those things in place. And so I think sometimes moms discredit how much knowledge they actually have on what their child needs to thrive.
For a lot of people, I see it's not always these big major accommodations. A lot of times it's the right little things in place that can go so far. And those are those things so often that these parents are doing
Yeah.
already that the school didn't do or didn't, and if we're honest, I've never walked into any elementary school that wasn't just an immediate sensory nightmare. You take a kid who's accommodated at home and you send them to a school, it's we're right back to the sensory piece, right? And
Yeah.
the mom who, cuts on a couple lamps instead of the bright overhead light in the
Yeah.
room, or because realizing this makes a difference. This feels a little bit calmer. Maybe never had the sensory language at all,
Yeah.
but realized that there's a difference when we have on the lamp versus the overhead light, or
Yeah.
whatever, if we have the blinds drawn a little bit, this seems to be a little bit different. Then they go to school and we can't figure it out. That goes right back to why I always look at the sensory stuff, because they're so actionable and
Sure.
overlooked at
Yeah.
the same time. But there's so many things that people do.
Even from one teacher to the next, you can find they did really well with this teacher, but now this year they have a different teacher and now they can't. What happened? They're like a totally different kid. And it's like, well, they're with a totally different teacher. Teachers are really great at intuitively creating a classroom environment that really supports that kid. And that's when we start looking, when we get into the nitty-gritty of like your neurotype and how does your neurosignature, what do you need? Do you need more routine? Do you need more predictability? Or do you need more flexibility and space to move around? We can see how two different kids with autism diagnoses can do really well in one classroom and not in another. It's based on what are those things that they need and where can they find those supports in place. It can be really overwhelming as a parent to try to figure that out, but I think it can be really fun when we approach it with a sense of curiosity and playfulness. Oh, how you have all of your fidget toys. I'm now totally going to go look up that finger foam roller as soon as we get off. It's awesome.
A language I use a lot, and sometimes I sent a mom an email a couple of days ago that I was sort of, asked for some sessions with a kiddo, and here's some questions that I've got. But I said, I want you to read these questions. Give me some grace here, because email is written. I don't want you to feel judged, but I use a language of compassionate curiosity.
Yeah.
And I said, so read these as though I'm speaking this with a tone of compassionate curiosity, because that's where it's coming from.
Yeah.
And this is, and I let that be the guiding approach for so much of my work.
Sure.
I think that language goes so far. And for the mamas, the parents listening to the podcast, for folks listening to examine kind of what you're doing with that same compassionate curiosity, things that you're not happy with, like, I don't like how I react in these moments. I wonder why it is, to look at it internally with that compassionate curiosity. I think that goes a long way and can create a lot of space. Or if this is a conversation with a partner, or if this is even maybe kiddos a little bit older and just sitting down to try to understand what's going on here. Let that kind of be that driving tone of, I'm curious, but also from this compassionate perspective because I care. And that's
Yeah.
how I can help.
Yeah, that's awesome. So tell us how people work with you and where they can find you.
My clinical practice is in the state of Georgia. We are working on opening up social work and interstate compact, hopefully in the next year to two. If people want to reach out, you can find me on social media. You can find me online. Happy to share information, content. And I can do some coaching if people are like, wait, I want to hear a little bit more about that. I can coach across state lines. I can do clinical work only in Georgia. You can find me at my website, sammarion.com. You can find me in my podcast, Neurodivergent Spot, which is sort of a fun interviewing different neurodivergent adults. And then Sam Marion Counseling on Instagram is the place that I'm most active.
Cool. Thank you, Sam, so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for this week's episode of the Sensory Savvy Mama. I hope you're walking away with some actionable tips and a renewed sense of hope for your journey. Remember, you are not alone in this journey. Your child is amazing, and you are the perfect mom for them. If you love this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other moms like you find our community and lets us know what you want to hear. If you want to connect further, you can find us on Instagram or subscribe to our newsletter for inspiration, exclusive sensory tips, behind-the-scenes glimpses, and so you don't miss out on any new episodes. We are all in this together, Mama. I love you, and I'm so proud of you. One last thing before we go. While I am an occupational therapist, I am not your child's occupational therapist. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. As the parent, you know your child best. So please use your best judgment and consult with your child's healthcare providers before exploring any of the strategies or ideas shared here. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out.